Why was everyone staring at her hands? They looked ordinary enough, calloused from work, nails short, the skin along her thumb stained faintly with motor oil. Nothing about those hands suggested they were capable of the impossible. And yet, moments ago, those same hands had fired 100 rounds without a single miss. The dust still hung over the California desert like a fine veil, soft and gold in the dying light. It shimmered around the silhouettes of spectators frozen in disbelief. Downrange, the final target swung gently in the heat-bent air, its center punched through so perfectly it looked printed, not pierced. A single voice broke the stunned silence. "Who the hell is she?" Claire Daniels lowered the borrowed Marine rifle, its barrel still whispering heat. Her breathing was steady, not triumphant, not shaken, just steady, as if she'd known all along that this was how it would end. But 3 months earlier, that certainty didn't exist. Back then, she was just another forgotten face behind a counter, selling screws and nails to people who never remembered her name. The world always looks smaller before it remembers who you are. The afternoon heat had been brutal that day in Lakewood. It pressed down on everything, on the asphalt, on the faded storefronts, even on the hearts of people who'd learned to stop hopping for miracles. Jameson's Hardware sat on the corner of Harbor and Mariposa, its blue awning more symbolic than effective against the California sun. The smell of lumber and paint thinner filled the narrow aisles, familiar and strangely comforting to Clare. She was kneeling on the floor, reorganizing a chaotic display of power tools. The hum of the air conditioner fought a losing battle with the heat. Her movements were measured, deliberate, efficient. There was peace in repetition, aligning boxes, tightening loose labels, making something disorderly behave. She didn't notice the door chime until a voice, clipped and commanding, spoke behind her. "Excuse me, miss. We need quarter-inch stainless lag bolts, 3-inch minimum." She turned and found herself face to face with 4 Marines. They looked like they had marched straight out of a recruitment poster, uniforms crisp, boots spotless, every movement precise. The one who spoke wore a captain's insignia. His gaze swept the store, then landed back on her with polite impatience, the kind reserved for civilians who weren't supposed to matter. "Aisle 7, second bay from the back," Claire replied, keeping her tone even. "But if you're mounting something under load, stainless will resist corrosion, not shear. You might want grade 8 hex instead." The captain blinked, thrown off for just a moment. "Just show me the bolts," he said. Claire nodded, led them down the aisle, and pulled down several boxes. As they inspected the hardware, snippets of their conversation reached her. "Mounting interface keeps drifting. Recalibration every transport cycle. Command says operator error. I'm telling you, it's the hardware." Claire's mind, uninvited but unstoppable, started solving the problem. Calibration drift, mounting rigidity, vibration transfer. She'd heard this before in her old life, in another world that had fallen apart long ago. "If your calibration keeps shifting," she said quietly, "you might be over-torquing the mounts. It kills your damping effect. You need compression, not brute force." The captain froze, then let out a short, humorless laugh. "Thanks for the tip, ma'am. I'll be sure to pass that along to the Marine Corps Engineering Division." The other Marines smirked, except one, a younger corporal with restless energy and sharp, curious eyes. He didn't laugh. He just watched her, thoughtful. When they left, the captain's arrogance lingered like the smell of hot brass. Claire exhaled slowly, the sting of dismissal old and familiar. Walter Jameson, her boss, emerged from the back office carrying a chipped coffee mug. "Marines giving you trouble?" he asked. "Nothing new. Just another guy allergic to advice," she said, stacking the boxes again. Walter chuckled. "You were right about those isolation grommets, by the way. Aerospace folks used to make that mistake all the time. Tighten until it breaks." He gave her a knowing look. "You've got the mind of an engineer, Claire. You ever think about doing more than this?" She smiled faintly, This pays the bills. But it not really. It barely kept the lights on in the little bungalow she shared with her mother. And that night, when she walked home through streets littered with cracked sidewalks and fading murals, the air heavy with jasmine and old car exhaust, Claire reminded herself that survival, not ambition, was enough. Her mother, Linda Daniels, met her at the door with the same soft smile she'd worn through every storm. At 62, her back curved slightly from decades of factory work, but her eyes still carried warmth that could light a dark room. "There's my girl," Linda said. "Long day." "The usual," Claire replied, washing her hands and joining her mother at the stove. "Smells good." Mrs. Montgomery brought tomatoes from her garden. Figured I'd make sauce. The kitchen was small, cluttered with the comforting signs of a life lived simply, jars labeled by hand, a radio humming softly, a wooden spoon older than Claire herself. It was the one place where time slowed down. They talked about small things: the neighbor's broken car, the local kid's baseball game, the church bake sale. Then Linda mentioned Pastor Fleming. "He's worried about the community center, says the roof about to cave in." Claire's knife paused mid-chop. "How bad?" $80,000 bad. The number landed heavy between them. The St. Michael's Community Center had been a lifeline for their neighborhood, a place for kids after school, a food pantry, a shelter from loneliness. Claire had seen what it meant to people like her mother. "They're planning a fundraiser," Linda added. "A veterans event next month. Maybe we can help." "With what, Mom? I can barely cover rent." "You've got heart, and that's something. I can bake, you can volunteer. Little things matter." Claire smiled sadly. Her mother's optimism was both beautiful and cruel. It never ran out, even when everything else did. That night, after her mother went to bed, Claire lingered in her room. On a shelf sat 3 relics from a life that no longer fit: a gold medal from the California State Shooting Championship, a newspaper clipping that read "Local shooter headed to Olympics," and a photograph of a 19-year-old girl with a rifle and a smile full of unbroken dreams. She touched the frame. The glass was cold. Morning came too soon. The rhythm repeated: wake, help her mother walk to work. But the world had changed in small, imperceptible ways. Sometimes it only takes one conversation to stir old ghosts. The door chime rang at 8 a.m. 3 Marines entered again, out of uniform this time but unmistakably military. The corporal from before, the one who hadn't laughed, approached the counter. "You're the one who mentioned isolation grommets, right?" he asked. Claire nodded. "That was me." "I'm Kyle Anderson," he said, gesturing to his companions. "These are Corporals Douglas and Lee. We wanted to ask you something." They explained their problem: the same calibration drift, the same stubborn captain. Their words were technical, but their frustration was human. They were being blamed for a failure they didn't cause. "If it's the mounts," Claire said, "you'll never hold zero no matter how good your shooters are." Anderson hesitated. "Would you be willing to prove that? There's a veterans fundraiser next month. Captain Sheridan's doing a shooting demo. If someone like you showed up and outshot him, maybe he'd listen." Claire laughed quietly. "Outshoot trained Marines. I think you've got the wrong person." "Maybe," Anderson said, smiling faintly, "but I don't think so." After they left, the store felt too quiet. Walter leaned against the doorway, sipping his coffee. "They want you to shoot, don't they?" "Something like that." "You going to do it?" "No," Claire said automatically. "That part of my life is over." Walter studied her. Sometimes things circle back for a reason. She didn't answer, but that night she couldn't stop thinking about it. The Marines, the challenge, the community center, $80,000 that no one had. She saw her mother's tired hands stirring sauce, heard the laughter of children echoing in a building that might not survive the winter. And she saw herself at 19, lined up with perfect aim and perfect faith, before everything shattered. 12 years ago, A single choice had destroyed her career. A training accident. A young recruit. Her uncle, then Major Thomas Garrison, falsifying the report to protect his own command. And Claire refusing to lie. He'd made sure the world punished her for it. Sponsorships gone, Olympic slot revoked, friends silent. By the time the dust settled, her name was poison. He climbed the ranks since then, now a colonel, respected, untouchable. She'd faded into the background, one more ghost swallowed by time. But ghosts have long memories. Days later, Pastor Fleming stopped by the store again. "Claire, we're organizing the fundraiser. We've got Marines volunteering for a shooting demonstration. Any ideas to make it exciting?" Claire hesitated, then said quietly, "What about a challenge? Marines vs. civilians. Winner earns bragging rights and people donate to vote for their side." The pastor's eyes lit up. "That could work. You know someone who'd take the civilian spot." Claire took a slow breath. Maybe. That night she went home and dug through her closet until her fingers brushed the old duffel bag. Inside, her shooting glove, the worn data book filled with wind notes, and a single picture of her younger self holding a trophy. She stared at it for a long time. The girl in that photo had believed that truth mattered more than comfort. She'd been punished for it, but she'd been right. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. The next morning, Anderson was waiting outside Jameson's Hardware. Before he could speak, Claire said, "Tell your captain I'll do it. 100 consecutive hits, 200 to 1,200 meters. Miss once, you're out, but I have conditions." Anderson blinked. "That's brutal even for Marines." "Then it'll prove the point," Claire said. "If your gear drifts, it'll show. And if anyone actually hits all 100, people will remember." Anderson grinned. "He won't turn that down. He'll think it's easy money." Claire's voice was calm, almost cold. "Tell him a hardware store clerk just bet $500 she can outshoot him." Walter appeared behind her, eyebrows raised. "You serious?" "Apparently," she said. "Then you'd better start practicing." Claire met his eyes. "Maybe it's time I did." For the first time in 12 years, something stirred inside her that wasn't fear or regret. It was quieter, older, like the faint click of a rifle bolt locking into place. Hope. The desert at dawn always had its own kind of silence, not empty, but waiting. The world held its breath before the heat came to chase it all away. Claire stood beside her car at the edge of the desert wind range, the early light painting long shadows across the sand. 12 years since she'd last stood on a firing line. 12 years since she dared to touch a rifle. She could smell the faint sweetness of oil and dust, feel the dry wind brushing her cheek. It was like stepping into an old memory you tried too hard to forget. Frank Albertson, range master, former competition director, and part of her past, walked toward her. His limp was more pronounced now, age having its say, but his eyes still held that sharp glint that used to make shooters nervous. "Didn't think I'd ever see you back here," he said. "I didn't think I'd be back either." "Circumstances, huh?" He nodded toward the gear bag in her hand. "Let's see if you still remember which end, which." They walked to the benches at the firing line. The sun was only a suggestion on the horizon, just enough light to outline the targets stretched across the valley, white shapes from 200 meters all the way out to 1,200, fading into the heat haze. Frank unlocked the equipment shed and pulled out a rifle. Remington 700, .308 caliber, solid, no frills. "Let's start simple." Claire accepted the weapon. It felt heavy and strange, like shaking hands with an old friend you didn't know how to talk to anymore. Her muscles remembered things her mind had buried: the balance, the weight, the ritual of checking every screw, every mount, every bolt. She knelt, chambered around, and let the scope settle into her vision. At 200 meters, the target waited. White circle, black center. She inhaled, exhaled, found that stillness between breaths. Crack! The rifle bucked softly, recoil pushing against her shoulder in a way that felt right. Downrange, the target showed a clean hit, just a few inches right of center. Frank adjusted the spotting scope. Good. You're reading the wind, but you're doubting yourself. Trust your first read. Second guessing's a killer. She nodded and fired again. Dead center. Then again and again. 5 shots. A tight group. Her heart pounded harder than it should have, not from effort, from recognition. For 3 hours they worked. Short distances first, then farther, the sun rising, the heat building until the metal on the benches burned to touch. At 400 meters she was steady. At 6, her rhythm faltered. At 800 her shots scattered like nervous thoughts. Not bad for someone out of the game 12 years, Frank said, scanning the last target through his scope. But you're thinking too much. You used to just know. Now you calculate. You'll have to get that back. How? She asked. He gave a small smile. Stop carrying 12 years in your head. That night back in her small kitchen, Claire stared at her hands again, the same hands that had rebuilt shelves and carried groceries, now trembling faintly from recoil and adrenaline. Her mother, Linda, watched her with quiet concern from across the table. You're training again, Linda said softly. Claire nodded. Frank's helping. The Marines took the bet. Of course they did. Pride's always more expensive than bullets. Claire smiled. You sound like Dad. Your father used to say that sometimes men mistake confidence for courage. Linda leaned forward, her eyes warm but serious. You're not doing this for them, are you? No, Claire said after a long pause. For the community center, for us, maybe for me. Her mother reached across the table, covering Claire's hand with her own. Then make sure you walk away proud, no matter how it ends. The next morning, Claire's alarm went off at 4:30. By 5:15, she was back at Desert Wind. The air was cold enough to sting her lungs when she breathed. Frank was already there, setting up targets. Range is yours till 8, he said. After that, it's public hours. Don't waste daylight. Claire began her drills, slow, deliberate, mechanical. She practiced position changes, reloads, sight alignment. Each motion was a negotiation between memory and rust. By 7:30, her shoulder throbbed from recoil, her eyes burned from focus, but the rhythm was returning. Still, when she pushed past 600 meters, she couldn't keep consistency. She could feel the tremor of hesitation inside her chest, not physical but emotional. It wasn't just about the wind or the bullet drop. It was about the voice in her head that whispered, "You don't belong here anymore." That voice carried her uncle's tone. 2 days later, a new visitor appeared at the hardware store. Claire was sorting paint cans when a woman in marine utilities approached the counter. Auburn hair in a tight bun, sharp green eyes, posture that said authority without arrogance. "You're Claire Daniels," the woman said. Claire straightened. "Depends who's asking." "Lieutenant Rachel Brennan, Logistics Officer, Camp Pendleton." Claire braced herself. "If you're here to tell me to back out of the fundraiser." "Actually," Brennan interrupted, lowering her voice, "I'm here because I hope you don't." That stopped her. "I've seen the maintenance logs for those new rifles Captain Sheridan's so proud of," Brennan continued. "They're faulty. Mounts lose 0 during transport. Every team using them reports drift. Sheridan keeps blaming operator error because admitting an equipment flaw would hurt his procurement record." "So you're saying I'm right," Claire said quietly. "I'm saying you're dangerous to the wrong people." Brennan gave a faint smile. "I like that." Claire frowned. "Why tell me this?" "Because good Marines are getting blamed for bad hardware. And because," Brennan hesitated, "I know what your uncle did 12 years ago. People talk. Some of us know the truth." The words hit harder than expected. Claire hadn't heard anyone speak that truth aloud in over a decade. For a moment, her throat tightened, but Brennan continued. "There's someone else who can help you," she said, scribbling on a notepad. "Gunnery Sergeant Brett Coleman, sniper instructor. He's been saying the same thing about the equipment, that it's flawed. Call him. He won't sugarcoat it. Claire looked at the number. Wouldn't he get in trouble? Probably, but some of us still think integrity's part of the job. Brennan tucked her pen back into her uniform and offered a short nod. Good luck, Miss Daniels. Give Sheridan hell. That night, Claire sat on the edge of her bed staring at the slip of paper. The digits blurred as fatigue pulled at her, but something inside her wouldn't let it go. Around 9 p.m. she dialed. The voice that answered was gravel rough and skeptical. Coleman. Gunnery Sergeant Coleman, my name's Clare Daniels. Lieutenant Brennan said you might be willing to help. A pause. You're the civilian taking on Sheridan. That's me. I heard about you, he said. Heard about Garrison too. He's your uncle, right? Her grip on the phone tightened. He was. He's still a colonel, still pulling strings. You sure you want to poke that bear? I already did. He just doesn't know how deep yet. There was a long silence. Then, meet me tomorrow, Desert Wind Range, 0600, bring your gear and a thick skin. The sun was just climbing when Claire arrived. Coleman was already there, tall, lean, weather-worn, maybe early 40s. His face looked carved from the same sand they were standing on. He didn't smile. You're late, he said. It's 5:58. If you're not early, you're late. Claire arched an eyebrow. That rule universal. In my world, yeah. He gestured to the rifle case beside him. Show me what you've got. She set up with the Remington Frank had loaned her. Coleman watched silently, eyes behind sunglasses, arms folded. 5 shots at 200 meters tight group, 600 wider, 800 rough. When she finished, she turned to find him shaking his head. Your fundamentals are solid. Breathing's good, triggers clean, but you don't trust yourself. You think, you calculate, then you hesitate. That's why you're inconsistent. I used to just feel it, she said quietly. Now it's gone. He studied her for a long moment. Lieutenant Brennan told me what happened. Garrison took your confidence, not your skill. Trauma does that. It rewires trust, especially self-trust. The words hit harder than recoil. Claire looked away. So how do I fix it? She asked. You stop thinking. Shooting's 90% mental. Mechanics are easy, believing yourself is. We'll train that belief back. He wasn't lying about being hard on her. For the next 4 hours, Coleman pushed her through drills that felt like psychological warfare. He'd make her wait 2 minutes before firing, force her to hold aim through muscle burn. He'd call out wrong wind speeds to see if she'd correct him or obey. You keep looking for permission to be right, he barked. Stop, trust your eyes, trust your gut. You were a natural once. Let that person back in. By noon, Claire was drenched in sweat, her shoulders sore, hands shaking. But something had shifted. Her last 5 shots at 800 landed close enough to make Coleman nod once, the smallest sign of approval. Better, he said. You're starting to remember who you are, but we've got a long way to go. He slung his rifle over his shoulder. Be here every morning, 05:30, before work. I have a job. Then you'll be tired. Decide what matters more, comfort or redemption. She didn't hesitate. See you at 05:30. He stopped, turned back once. And Daniels quit calling this revenge. It's just shooting. 1 bullet, 1 target, everything else is noise. Driving home, Claire's muscles ached, but her mind buzzed with clarity. For the first time in years, exhaustion felt good. Earned. Deserved. She rolled down the window, let the desert wind wash over her face, carrying away the rust of old fear. Then her phone rang. An unfamiliar number. She answered and froze. Hello, Claire, came a voice she hadn't heard in 12 years. Calm, polished, venom wrapped in civility. It's your Uncle Thomas. Her heart slammed against her ribs. How did you get this number? I'm a colonel in the Marine Corps. I can get any number I want. She said nothing. I've heard about your stunt, he continued. challenging my officers at a public fundraiser. I'm calling to advise you to withdraw." "Why would I?" "Because you'll fail. Publicly. Because you'll embarrass yourself again, and this time it won't just ruin your life. It'll make a mockery of everything you used to stand for." "The only thing I embarrassed," Claire said quietly, "was your cover-up." There was silence, then a sharp exhale. "I protected the Corps from scandal. That recruit's death was tragic, but dragging it into the open wouldn't have helped anyone. You chose idealism over loyalty. You lost. That's on you. You destroyed my career. I protected my own. That's what adults do." Then his tone shifted, colder. "Withdraw, Claire, or I'll make things harder. Your mother's disability reviews are up soon. It would be a shame if the process became complicated." For a second, Claire couldn't breathe. "You'd hurt her." "I'd prefer not to," he said smoothly, "but you leave me little choice." She pulled her car to the side of the road, shaking. "You really haven't changed. And you still don't know when to stop. Don't make the same mistake twice." Claire's voice hardened. "The mistake was believing men like you deserve silence. I'm not withdrawing. You want to watch me fail? Come to the range, front row." "Claire." She hung up. Her hands trembled, but her eyes burned with a clarity she hadn't felt in years. Rage, yes, but beneath it something stronger. Resolve. This wasn't about a bed anymore. It was about every person ever silenced by power, about her mother, about herself. By the time she reached home, her decision was carved into her bones. Linda listened quietly as Claire told her everything. The threat, the call, the venom behind polite words. "He can try whatever he wants," Linda said, pale but steady. "I'm not letting him scare you again. You shoot, you finish this." Her mother's strength steadied her own. They sat together long after midnight, holding hands, the old kitchen clock ticking between them. And when Claire finally slept, she dreamed of the range of targets stretching into infinity, and the still, impossible calm that lived between heartbeats. The alarm went off at 4:30 a.m. For a moment, Claire didn't move. She just lay there, staring at the ceiling while the world outside was still black and silent. The weight of exhaustion pressed into her limbs, but beneath it, something deeper, discipline. The kind she thought she'd lost years ago. She swung her legs out of bed. Her feet hit the cold floor. In the next room, her mother stirred faintly but didn't wake. Claire dressed in silence, laced her boots, and stepped out into the pre-dawn chill. The streets were empty, washed in the dim orange of streetlights. Each breath she took came out as a pale mist, the kind of quiet breath that feels like a promise. By 5:20, the faint outline of the desert wind range appeared ahead of her, its fences glinting under the first light. Coleman was already there, standing beside his truck with a thermos in one hand. He didn't look surprised to see her. He never did. "You're early," he said. "You said early was on time." He grinned faintly. "Good, let's work." For the next 2 weeks, the mornings belonged to Coleman. He became as constant as the sunrise. His training methods were relentless. If she was 2 minutes late, he made her do dry-fire drills until her arms trembled. If her groupings widened, he had her repeat the shot until her breath came in shallow gasps. He made her shoot in the wind, in glare, in half-light, in silence so heavy she could hear her heartbeat. Then he'd break that silence without warning, clapping, shouting corrections, dropping brass near her to simulate chaos. "Focus through the noise," he'd bark. "You can't control the wind, you can't control the noise, control yourself." Sometimes she wanted to walk away. Her body ached constantly. Her shoulder was bruised purple, and every night she came home so sore that lifting a coffee mug hurt. But she didn't stop. Something was happening inside her, something she hadn't felt in over a decade. The hesitation was fading. The self-doubt was cracking, replaced by instinct. The old rhythm was coming back, the one she used to call the quiet place. The space between heartbeats. By the third week, she could feel herself changing. Her shooting improved. Her breathing slowed without thought. She could read the wind just by watching the flick of a flag or a shimmer in the air. Coleman noticed it too. "You're getting dangerous again," he said one morning as she reloaded. "Dangerous how?" "The kind of dangerous that scares people who think control equals power." He looked at her for a long moment. "How's your mother?" "She's good," Claire said. "Better than me. She says she's proud." "She should be." Coleman's voice softened just a little. "You remind me of my sister. She never backed down either. Got her fired once for calling out her on a botched field report. People like you don't win often, but when you do, the whole damn world remembers." Meanwhile, word about the fundraiser spread. Posters went up across Lakewood. "Marines versus Community Champion. St. Michael's Veterans Fundraiser, October 23. Local radio mentioned it. The church bulletin ran a piece about it. People at the hardware store stopped by just to ask, "You're the one taking on the Marines, right?" At first, the attention embarrassed her. She'd spent so many years learning to stay small that suddenly being visible again felt unnatural, like stepping into bright light after too long in the dark. But then something shifted. The support wasn't just curiosity, it was belief. Mrs. Montgomery baked cookies with 100 hits iced across the top. Kids from the neighborhood drew pictures of her aiming at a target. Even the delivery drivers at the store started calling her Sharpshooter Clare. The entire town was watching, and somehow instead of fear it gave her strength. Every evening after training, Claire would return home to find her mother waiting. Sometimes dinner was already ready. Sometimes the kitchen was quiet except for the radio. But there was always warmth in that small house, the kind of warmth no amount of money could buy. "You look stronger," Linda said one night, watching Claire massage her shoulder. "Like you've remembered something." "Maybe I have." Her mother smiled. "Good, then don't forget it again." 2 weeks before the event, Coleman decided it was time for a full simulation. 100 shots, random distances, time pressure. "You miss once, it's over," he said, setting the targets. Frank Albertson, the old range master, showed up to watch, leaning on his cane. "If you can do this here, you can do it anywhere," he told her. The first 20 shots went smooth. 200 to 400 meters, routine. The rhythm came easily. The sound of each shot echoed into the valley and faded before the next. At 500, the wind shifted. Her first round landed an inch right. Not a miss, but close enough to shake her concentration. "Focus," Coleman called. "Forget the last shot." She reset, fired again. Center hit. The drill went on 600, 700, 800 meters. Sweat ran down her neck. Her shoulder ached. Every movement demanded effort. At 800, she began to feel fatigue claw at her. Coleman said nothing, just watched through his spotting scope. 90 rounds, 91, 92. Then at 93, the wind gusted without warning. The bullet struck just outside the circle. Coleman lifted a hand. "Stop." Claire lowered the rifle, her breathing ragged. 92 hits before failure. She stared downrange, jaw tight. "I had it, I felt it." "And you'll feel it again," Coleman said. "That wasn't failure, that was rehearsal." Frank nodded from behind his scope. "You just proved you can live in that space again. The rest is luck and heart." Later that afternoon, Claire sat on the tailgate of her car, the desert wind whipping her hair across her face. Coleman handed her a bottle of water. "You're close," he said, "real close." Close isn't enough. Maybe not, but for someone who hasn't shot in 12 years, 92 straight hits, that's a story people remember. She glanced up. "You really think I can beat him?" Coleman looked toward the horizon. "I think Sheridan's training to prove he's right. You're training because you've got something to save. There's a difference." He paused. The people with something to protect usually win. That night the phone rang again, Only this time it wasn't her uncle, it was Pastor Fleming. "Claire," he said, his voice trembling with excitement, "you wouldn't believe it. We've already sold over 400 tickets. Donations are pouring in. If the event goes well, we might actually hit the goal." Claire smiled despite her fatigue. "That's incredible. You've done more for this community in 3 weeks than anyone's managed in years," he said. "Whatever happens that day, you've already helped us." She hung up and sat there in the dark for a long time, staring at the small medal on her shelf. Already helped us. It wasn't victory yet, but maybe it was enough to keep going. The next morning, Coleman wasn't alone. A small group of Marines from Camp Pendleton stood near the firing line, students of his, by the look of them. "New audience," Coleman said. "Pressure test. You'll need to get used to eyes on you." At first, she hated it. She could feel their gazes judging every movement, every shot. But as the session went on, something changed. The noise faded. The crowd disappeared. There was only the rifle, the scope, the horizon. When she finished the last drill, one of the younger Marines muttered, "Damn, she's good." Coleman grinned. "You have no idea." 2 days later, Anderson stopped by the store again. "You're becoming a legend on base," he said. "Sheridan's getting rattled. His last run topped out at 78 hits and he's furious." "Good," Claire said, but her stomach tightened anyway. Sheridan wasn't the type to lose gracefully. "There's more," Anderson added, lowering his voice. "Your uncle's been calling around, asking questions about you, trying to discredit you before the event." Claire exhaled slowly. "Let him. I've already lost everything he could take." But in truth, she knew that wasn't entirely true. He could still hurt her mother. He could still twist perception. Power like his didn't fade, it just waited for opportunities. Still, fear had lost its hold. She'd faced it once and survived. She could do it again. A few days before the fundraiser, Brennan arrived at the range with bad news. "Sheridan's requested that the challenge use the new Marine rifles only," she said. "No personal weapons. Says it's to ensure fairness." Coleman swore under his breath. "That's nonsense. Those systems are unstable." "I know," Brennan said, "but Command approved it. You'll both be shooting the same weapon type, the M110A2. You'll have to adapt." Claire's stomach sank. "I've never trained with one." "You'll get a few hours with one tomorrow," Brennan said. "Unofficially make them count." The next day she did. The M110 felt alien. Sleek, high-tech, heavy with precision she didn't trust. Its digital scope hummed faintly, the ballistic computer whispering numbers in her eye. Coleman watched as she fired her first few rounds. The shots landed close, but not centered. "Trust yourself," he said. "Not the computer, that thing lies." She adjusted, fired again, read the wind herself instead of the screen, and hit dead center. For 6 hours she pushed herself to learn the rifle. By sunset she'd started to understand it, not love it, not yet, but accept it. When she packed up, Brennan stood beside her. "Sheridan doesn't realize what you are, does he?" "What's that?" "A reminder that truth doesn't go away just because men like him pretend it doesn't exist." Claire smiled faintly. "Let's hope truth can shoot straight." That night she barely slept. The town buzzed with anticipation. Posters hung in cafe windows. Kids wore makeshift Team Clare shirts. Even the local news had picked up the story. Civilian woman challenges Marine sharpshooters in charity event. At midnight, Claire stood by her window, looking out at the quiet street. She thought about her uncle, about the recruit who never got justice, about 12 years of silence and what it had cost her. She whispered softly, "Tomorrow I stop hiding." Then she turned off the light. The morning of the event began with silence. Not the calm kind, the heavy kind, thick with nerves and unspoken thoughts. Claire woke before dawn, long before her alarm. The sky outside her window was still ink black, stars faint behind the early fog. She sat up, feeling the quiet press against her like a weight. Her heart wasn't racing. It was too steady, too controlled, like it knew what was coming. Her mother was already in the kitchen when she came out, humming softly as she poured coffee into a chipped mug. The smell filled the room, grounding, human. "Couldn't sleep?" Linda asked without turning. "Could you?" Her mother chuckled. Mothers never sleep when their children are about to take on the United States Marine Corps. Claire smiled, but only slightly. Her palms were already slick with nerves. "You don't have to come, Mom. It's going to be a circus." "I've missed too many things already," Linda said firmly. "I'll be there, front row." For a moment, neither spoke. The quiet between them said more than words could. Claire reached out, squeezed her mother's hand. "Whatever happens," Linda said softly, "remember why you're doing it." "I will." Then her mother added, with that same quiet wisdom that had carried them through everything, "Sometimes truth needs a witness. Today it'll have one." By the time Claire reached St. Michael's Field, the place was unrecognizable. Rows of tents lined the perimeter, vendors setting up coffee stands and banners. Flags snapped in the wind. The smell of grilled food mingled with the sharp scent of gun oil from the firing range set up across the open plain. Hundreds of people were already gathering: veterans, families, reporters, kids holding cardboard signs that read "Go Clare" and "Team Community." The stage at the far end bore the banner: St. Michael's Fundraiser, MARINESV's, Civilian Marksmanship Challenge. Claire parked behind the volunteers' tents, keeping her head down as she unloaded her gear. But she didn't make it 10 steps before a voice called out, "Daniels." It was Coleman, standing beside the firing area, already surrounded by Marines. He wore civilian clothes but carried himself like he was still on duty. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes met hers with the faintest nod. "You ready?" he asked when she reached him. "No," Claire said honestly. He smirked. "Good. Overconfidence kills more shooters than recoil ever will." They moved toward the equipment tables. Sheridan was there, Captain Mark Sheridan, tall, square-jawed, confidence radiating from every inch of his polished demeanor. His uniform was immaculate. His smile was. "Well, if it isn't the hardware clerk," he said. "Glad you showed. I was afraid you might come to your senses." Claire met his gaze evenly. "I tried, didn't take." The crowd around them chuckled, but Sheridan's smile didn't falter. "Hope you brought your lucky charm, Daniels. You'll need it." Coleman stepped forward before Claire could answer. "Enough chatter. Both shooters will use the same platform. Marine-issued M110A2 standard optics. Targets range from 200 to 1,200 meters. Each hit counts 1 point. First miss ends your streak." He turned toward Sheridan. "You requested this setup, still confident?" Sheridan grinned, born confident. Then to Claire, "Ladies first." The crowd began to quiet as she walked to the firing line. Cameras turned. Reporters whispered. She could hear the hum of generators, the distant chatter of kids, the sharp rustle of flags in the breeze. Coleman leaned in as she adjusted her rifle on the bench. "Remember, it's just noise. The world ends at your crosshair." She nodded once, took a slow breath, and let her mind sink into that familiar silence, the quiet place. The first target was at 200 meters. Easy. The crosshair hovered, the breath stilled, the trigger broke clean. Crack! The bullet struck dead center. The electronic sensor flashed green. The crowd erupted in cheers. "One down." 250 meters. Another clean hit. 300, 400, 5. Each round found its mark. Her movements were mechanical, precise, but inside she was fighting to keep emotion at bay. By the 10th shot, sweat began to gather under her collar despite the cool morning. The noise of the crowd blurred into a distant hum. She could hear only her breathing and Coleman's calm, steady voice behind her. Winds shifting from the left, quarter value, trust your instinct. She adjusted slightly, fired again. Green flash, another hit. Then another and another. Each impact drew louder applause, louder gasps. Even some of the Marines began nodding, impressed despite themselves. Sheridan watched from behind the line, arms folded, the faintest frown tugging at the corners of his mouth. By 30 shots, Claire's rhythm was flawless. 40, 50. Her breathing never wavered, her trigger pull never faltered. At 60, Coleman leaned closer. "How you doing?" "Like I never left," she whispered. And for a moment it was true. The years melted away. The scandal, the fear, the long nights behind a counter, they all disappeared. It was just her and the horizon. The wind picked up, dust swirled. The next target was 900 meters. "Mirage running right to left," Coleman murmured. She compensated, fired. The hit was perfect. The crowd erupted, children waving signs, veterans saluting from their seats, her mother smiling through tears near the front row. By 80 hits, the crowd had gone quiet again, not out of boredom but disbelief. Each green flash was a statement now, each impact a defiance. Sheridan's smile had vanished completely. He adjusted his gloves, jaw tight. His Marines whispered to one another. The cameras zoomed closer. Coleman stepped back, whispering to the officials. Claire didn't notice. She was deep in the rhythm, every breath measured, every trigger press a heartbeat in slow motion. 90 hits. 91. 92. At 93, the crosswind doubled. Her hair whipped across her cheek. Coleman called, "Wait it out." But Claire didn't wait. She adjusted one click, one instinctive correction born not from numbers but from something older, feel. Crack. Green flash. Coleman exhaled a laugh. "Damn, you've got ice in your veins." At 95, Sheridan stepped closer, pretending to adjust his earpiece but clearly watching every move. Claire ignored him. 96, 97, 98. By now, the crowd had stopped breathing. Even the flag seemed to pause mid-wave. She chambered the 99th round. Her heart was steady. Coleman said nothing. He knew not to. The shot broke clean. Center hit. One left. Coleman crouched beside her. "You good?" She nodded. "Better than good." She chambered the last round slowly, savoring the sound of the bolt sliding forward. She looked downrange, 1,200 meters, the hardest shot. Heat shimmered above the ground. The target flickered in and out of focus. Her breath stilled. The world fell away. Then from somewhere behind the tents, a sudden metallic clatter, a distraction. Someone had dropped a microphone stand. The noise echoed across the field. For a heartbeat, her focus wavered. Coleman whispered, "Stay in it." She exhaled once, steadying her hand. The sight picture drifted, corrected, settled. And then she fired. The crack echoed into the valley. A long, suspended silence followed. Even the wind seemed to stop. Then the green flash appeared on the 1,200-meter target. 100 hits. For a moment no one moved. Then the entire crowd erupted. Shouts, cheers, applause rolling like thunder. Children jumped up and down. Veterans stood and saluted. Even a few Marines broke into reluctant grins. Linda covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Coleman put a hand on Claire's shoulder. "That," he said softly, "was history." She lowered the rifle, breathing hard, the adrenaline washing through her like fire and light. Her knees trembled, not from fear but from release. Then she turned and found Sheridan standing just a few steps away. His face was pale, jaw clenched. He tried to smile, failed. "Well," he said tightly, "beginner's luck." Coleman stepped between them. "No, that was mastery." But Sheridan didn't back down. "Let's see if she can do it twice." Coleman's tone turned sharp. Rules were clear, 100 shots. She hit every single one. You got your answer. Sheridan looked past him, straight at Claire. "You've made your point. Enjoy it while it lasts." Then he turned and walked away. As the crowd swarmed her, reporters shouting, flashbulbs popping, Claire tried to process what had just happened. Her mother reached her first, throwing her arms around her. "You did it," Linda whispered, voice breaking. "You did it." Claire held her tight, eyes closed. "We did it, Mom. The center's safe now." Pastor Fleming appeared, beaming. "Over 100,000 raised. You saved St. Michael's." Claire smiled, dazed, but inside something else stirred, a quiet unease. Sheridan's words, his tone, that cold promise. And then, as she turned toward the crowd, she saw him, her uncle. Colonel Thomas Garrison standing near the back, arms crossed, expression unreadable, watching. Their eyes met. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then he gave a slow, measured smile, the kind that wasn't victory or defeat, just warning. That night, when the lights went out and the cheering faded, Claire sat alone on her porch. The rifle leaned against the wall beside her. The sky was full of stars. The air smelled faintly of dust and triumph. Her phone buzzed, a message, unknown number. "You think this is over, it's not." She stared at it for a long moment, then deleted it. Her voice, barely above a whisper, carried into the quiet. "It's over for me." But somewhere deep down she knew it was. Because men like her uncle didn't forgive truth, they outlasted it. And if he meant a fight back, then this time she wouldn't face him alone. How does victory feel when it's followed by silence? Not the kind that brings peace, but the kind that warns you something is coming. 3 days after the fundraiser, Claire woke to that silence. No excitement, no interviews, no reporters, just quiet, the kind that hums under the skin. The town had gone back to normal. The news cycle had moved on. The world had clapped, cheered, and then forgotten. Except the Marines hadn't. And neither had her uncle. At the hardware store, Walter handed her the morning paper with a frown. "Page 6, he said, "bottom corner." Claire unfolded it and froze. Headline, "Fundraiser Shooter Under Investigation. Unauthorized Weapon Access Raises Questions." Below it, a small photo of her at the event, smiling faintly beside Coleman and Brennan. The article accused her of potentially gaining access to restricted military gear and violating range security protocols. It cited unnamed Marine sources. She felt her stomach drop. "This is Sheridan," she said. "He's trying to smear me." Walter exhaled. "And he's good at it. That article's going to spread. People love a hero's fall." She folded the paper carefully, her jaw tightening. "Then he's going to find out I don't break that easy." By evening, she'd received her first call. It wasn't Sheridan, it was her uncle. "Bad day." His voice was smooth, almost cheerful. "Did you write it?" she asked. He laughed softly. No, that was Sheridan's initiative, but I can't say I blame him. You embarrassed him publicly, Claire. You embarrassed the Corps, and you embarrassed me." I told the truth. "That's not embarrassment, that's exposure." "Semantics," he said. "You had your little moment, it's over. Don't make it worse by chasing justice again. The world already saw what you wanted them to see. Let it go." Claire's hand clenched around the phone. "You've spent your whole life covering your lies, not this time." His voice sharpened. "You have no idea what you're playing with." "I do," she said. "It's called integrity." He chuckled again. "Integrity doesn't pay lawyers. It doesn't protect your mother's benefits. Think carefully before you start another war, Claire." She hung up. But her hands were shaking, not with fear this time, but with fury. The next morning, a letter arrived. Stamped confidential, Veteran Affairs Review Notice. Her mother's name was printed across the top. Claire read the first few lines and felt the world tilt. "The Office of Veteran Affairs has initiated a review of Linda Daniels' disability compensation claim. Pending further documentation, benefits will be temporarily suspended." Her mother found her sitting at the table, the letter trembling in her hand. "Claire, they're cutting your support," she said quietly. "Pending review." Linda took the paper, scanned it once inside. "Thomas." Claire nodded. Her mother set the letter down and reached for her hand. "Then we fight back." Tears burned behind Claire's eyes. "He's using you to get to me." "Let him try," Linda said firmly. "You keep your head high, we'll manage." But Claire saw the worry behind her mother's calm. She saw the faint tremor in her fingers. And in that moment, she made a decision. If her uncle wanted a fight, she'd give him one. Coleman was waiting for her at the range that afternoon, his arms folded. He'd seen the article. "Sheridan's behind it," she said. "I know," he replied. "He's trying to bury the hardware issue by burying you. They're coming after my mother too, her benefits." Coleman's expression darkened. "That's Garrison. That's not the Corps, that's personal." She nodded. "Then I'm going to make it personal back." He raised an eyebrow. "What's the plan?" Claire hesitated. "Evidence. Brennan said there were maintenance logs, right? Reports about the rifles losing 0. If we can prove they falsified those records, we can expose everything." Coleman studied her. "That's dangerous. You're talking about crossing the line between moral and legal." "Then I'll cross it carefully." He sighed. "You sound like me 20 years ago." "You going to stop me?" "No," he said. "I'll help." That night, Brennan met them in a quiet diner outside Camp Pendleton. The neon sign buzzed above the window, half the letters burned out. "I can't give you direct access," Brennan said quietly, stirring her coffee. "But there's a backup server for range diagnostics. Every malfunction log from the past year is stored there. If Sheridan falsified anything, it'll be in that data." Coleman frowned. "How do we get in?" "There's a civilian audit terminal in the logistics office," Brennan said. "Security's tight, but I might still have the access codes." Claire studied her. "You're risking your career." Brennan shrugged. "Some things are worth more than rank." The three of them sat in silence for a moment, the weight of what they were planning sinking in. Finally, Brennan slid a small slip of paper across the table. "Code expires in 48 hours. If you're going to do this, do it fast." The next night, they drove out to Pendleton. Claire sat in the passenger seat, dressed in plain clothes, hood pulled low. Coleman drove, eyes scanning the road. Brennan rode in the back, silent, tense. The base loomed in the distance, rows of hangars and floodlit fences. Claire's heart pounded. "I shouldn't be doing this," she whispered. "You shouldn't have to," Brennan replied. They parked near a maintenance depot, the air thick with the smell of oil and salt. Brennan led them through a side entrance using her badge. The corridors were sterile, the fluorescent lights humming faintly. In the logistics room, rows of terminals glowed in the dark. Brennan pointed to one near the end. "That's the audit station. The logs are partitioned, encrypted, but once you're in, it'll show the diagnostics history." Claire sat, hands steady despite the adrenaline. She entered the code. The terminal blinked, then opened. Coleman stood guard by the door, listening for footsteps. Lines of data scrolled across the screen: dates, calibration tests, maintenance reports. Brennan leaned over her shoulder. "There, look," she whispered. "Serial 3447 Sheridan's rifle. The logs were altered. See that timestamp? There's a gap. That means someone deleted failure reports." Claire's pulse raced. "How do we copy it?" Brennan handed her a flash drive. "Plug it in, quick." The screen flickered. The progress bar crawled: 10%, 40%, 80%. Then footsteps. Coleman hissed, "Someone's coming." The download hit 94%. Brennan moved to the hallway, pretending to be checking her tablet. Two Marines appeared, laughing, mid-conversation. "Evening, Lieutenant," one said. "Evening," Brennan replied smoothly. "Just auditing supply logs." The Marines nodded and moved on. Claire exhaled as the bar hit 100%. Done. They pulled the drive, wiped the session, and slipped out the side door into the night. Back at Coleman's house, they loaded the data on his laptop. The screen filled with corrupted logs, then clean entries. Here, Brennan said, every single system reported zero drift after inspection. But look, these calibration patterns are impossible. Copy-paste jobs. He forged them. Coleman whistled softly. You've got him. Sheridan falsified records, and if Garrison approved it, that's conspiracy. Claire stared at the screen, her jaw tightening. Then we take it to the press. Brennan hesitated. Be careful, this isn't just one captain and a colonel. You're talking about the core image. They'll fight dirty. Claire nodded, so will I. The story broke 3 days later. Headline: Leaked records suggest Marine rifle data falsified. Whistleblower raises integrity concerns. Sheridan's name was in the second paragraph, Garrison's in the fourth. By noon, news vans swarmed Camp Pendleton. Reporters demanded statements. The Corps announced an internal review. Sheridan was suspended pending investigation. And Claire Daniels, the woman they'd tried to discredit, was suddenly the face of accountability. She didn't feel victorious. She felt exhausted. Coleman called that night. You did it. We did it, she corrected. Either way, they won't forgive you. I'm not looking for forgiveness. She hung up and sat in the dark for a long time, the flash drive still in her hand. 2 days later, her uncle came to see her. He didn't call this time. He showed up in person, pressed uniform, calm expression, menace behind politeness. Impressive work, he said, standing on her porch. You always had a talent for making messes look noble. Claire crossed her arms. You falsified safety data. Marines could have died because of you. He smiled faintly. And yet they didn't. I protected careers. You've destroyed them. Careers built on lies deserve to fall. His gaze hardened. You've made enemies, Claire, real ones, the kind that don't stop at bad press. I've lived with worse. He took a step closer. You think truth wins, it doesn't, power does. Claire met his eyes. Then maybe it's time someone reminded power what truth feels like. He stared at her for a long moment, then turned and walked away. Be careful what you wish for. As his car disappeared down the street, Claire stood there in the evening light, heart pounding, not with fear this time, but with something clearer. Freedom. That night Brennan called. They're launching a formal inquiry, she said. Sheridan's denying everything. Garrison's distancing himself, but he's under review too. Claire nodded. Good. There's something else, Brennan added. The command board wants you to testify officially. For a moment, Claire said nothing. The thought of standing in uniformed halls again, surrounded by the same system that had exiled her years ago, it made her chest tighten. But then she remembered her mother's trembling hands, the recruit who died for someone else's lie, and the long years of silence she'd endured. Tell them I'll be there, she said. The night before her hearing, she stood at the range one last time. The wind was soft, the sky burning gold with sunset. Coleman was beside her, watching as she set up the rifle. Why are you here? He asked. Because this is where I found myself again, she said. He nodded. Whatever happens tomorrow, remember this place, this peace. They can't take that. She smiled faintly. Thanks, Gunny. He gave a half grin. Don't call me that, I'm retired. Not today, you're not. They stood in silence as she fired one last shot into the fading light. The echo rolled through the desert like a heartbeat. It hit dead center. The courtroom wasn't a courtroom. It was a conference chamber, sterile, silent, too white to feel human. Rows of uniforms lined one side, brass shining under fluorescent lights. At the center of the room, 3 officers sat behind a long table. Their faces were unreadable, masks of professionalism honed by years of bureaucracy. And at the far end, standing alone, was Clare. She wasn't in uniform. They hadn't allowed that. Civilians didn't get ribbons or recognition, just a plain black blazer, a steady voice, and the truth. Coleman sat a few rows behind her, silent, arms folded, a pillar in the storm. Brennan was there too, her posture tense, eyes fixed on the board like a hawk guarding its young. Across the room, Thomas Garrison and Mark Sheridan sat side by side. The sight of them together almost made Clare laugh. Power and pride, pretending they weren't drowning. The lead officer cleared his throat. "Miss Daniels, you've been called as a witness in the ongoing inquiry regarding falsified weapons maintenance data. You've also been named in multiple reports alleging unauthorized access to restricted systems. Do you understand the charges?" Clare nodded. "I understand." He leaned forward slightly. "And you maintain that your access was obtained through a Lieutenant Brennan." "I accessed the system to expose falsified data," Clare said evenly. "The records prove it. Marines were being blamed for mechanical failures that weren't their fault. And you obtained this data without clearance." She met his gaze. "I obtained the truth. Clearance wasn't an option." A low murmur rippled through the room. The officer raised a hand. "This isn't about moral justification, Miss Daniels. It's about protocol." "Protocols protect systems," Clare said quietly. "Truth protects people. I chose people." For the first time, something flickered in his expression. Unease, maybe respect. He turned to Garrison. "Colonel, as Command Logistics Oversight Officer, you oversaw the equipment procurement that's now under review. Would you like to respond?" Garrison stood, posture flawless. The reports in question were approved based on the information provided by Captain Sheridan's division. If errors occurred, they did so below my level of oversight. Clare could hear the rehearsed tone, the self-preserving precision. He was too polished to be honest. Sheridan followed, his voice clipped and defensive. "Our systems performed within acceptable parameters. The failures Miss Daniels refers to were caused by operator mishandling. Any implication otherwise is a misinterpretation." Coleman's jaw tightened. Brennan muttered under her breath, "Liar." The officer turned back to Clare. "Miss Daniels, do you have evidence contradicting Captain Sheridan's statement?" Without a word, Clare reached into her folder and slid a printed chart across the table. The top read, "Range Diagnostics, Serial 3447, 3448, 3450. "These are the logs from the backup system," she said. "Each entry was copied from another. Identical time stamps, identical data points, even identical typographical errors. That's not coincidence, it's falsification." The officers leaned closer. One of them adjusted his glasses. Garrison's composure cracked slightly. Sheridan looked at him, a flicker of panic in his eyes. Clare continued, "You blamed Marines for failures caused by defective hardware. You let good men and women think they weren't good enough. You let their careers suffer just to protect numbers on a report." The room went still. For a moment, no one spoke. Then the lead officer said softly, "Miss Daniels, what made you come forward?" Clare hesitated. The answer was bigger than she'd expected. "Because 12 years ago," she said, voice steady but low, "I watched a young Marine die in a training accident. My uncle, Colonel Garrison, covered it up to protect his command. When I told the truth, I lost everything. My career, my reputation, my future. I stayed silent after that. I let fear dictate what was right. I won't do that again." Garrison stood abruptly. "That accusation is unfounded and irrelevant to this inquiry." "No, sir," Clare said, turning to face him fully. "It's exactly relevant. This isn't about weapons. It's about a culture of silence. You taught me that silence protects power. You were wrong." For a moment their eyes locked. Two generations of belief collided, duty versus conscience, control versus truth. The officer's gavel struck once, order. But the silence that followed wasn't order. It was revelation. The hearing lasted 6 hours. By the end, Claire felt hollowed out. Every question scraped against old scars. Every answer reopened memories she'd buried under years of quiet survival. When it was finally over, she stepped outside into the blinding sunlight. The air tasted like freedom and exhaustion. Coleman joined her on the steps. "You did good," he said. "I don't feel good." "You weren't supposed to. Truth never feels good when it's real." Brennan appeared behind him, holding her phone. "They've already suspended Sheridan pending full investigation. Garrison's command authorities frozen until review." Claire blinked. "So that's it." "For now," Brennan said. "But you just shook a tree that's been growing for decades. Branches are going to fall." Coleman smirked. "And maybe a few rotten roots get pulled too." For the next few weeks, the military community buzzed with quiet shock. Some saw Clare as a hero, others called her reckless. The Corps opened an internal ethics review. Sheridan resigned before the outcome. Garrison was placed on administrative leave, an unspoken exile for men who'd flown too close to the sun. Claire's name appeared in the news again, not as the hardware clerk, not as the whistleblower. This time it was former Olympic hopeful exposes military corruption. But she didn't care about headlines. She cared about peace. And for the first time in 12 years, she felt it beginning to return. One evening she found herself back at the range. Not to train, not to prove anything, just to shoot. The desert air was warm, the wind gentle. The targets glowed faintly in the late light. She set up the same rifle she'd used at the fundraiser, checked the chamber, and lay prone on the mat. The first shot cracked through the stillness. The bullet hit clean. Then another and another. Not to impress anyone, not to win, just because it felt right. When she paused, Coleman's voice came from behind her. "You could teach, you know. We could use people like you." She smiled faintly. "I don't know if I'm ready to teach Marines how to shoot." He shook his head. "Not just shooting. Teach them how to stand up when it's easier to kneel." She thought about that, maybe. He chuckled. "That's a yes waiting for time." Later that night, Claire and her mother sat outside under the porch light. The air was still, the crickets loud in the distance. Linda poured 2 glasses of iced tea, her hands steadier than they'd been in weeks. "They reinstated my benefits today," she said quietly. "Full compensation, retroactive." Claire smiled. "You see, sometimes truth wins." Her mother tilted her head. "Not by itself. It needs someone stubborn enough to drag it into the light." They sat in silence for a while, just watching the stars. Linda broke it softly. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" "Not really," Claire said. "For so long I was just trying to survive the past. I forgot to plan for the future." "Well," Linda said, smiling faintly, "you've got one now, don't waste it hiding." The next morning, a letter arrived. Official seal, Department of Defense. Claire opened it slowly. It wasn't a reprimand, it wasn't a threat. It was a commendation. For actions that contributed to the integrity and safety of Marine Corps operations, Ms. Claire Daniels is recognized for exceptional civic courage. It wasn't military decoration, but it was acknowledgement from the same institution that had once cast her out. She read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in her drawer, beside the gold medal she'd almost forgotten she earned years ago. That evening, Brennan called. "They're closing the case," she said. "Sheridan's career's finished. Garrison's being forced to retire. They'll call it voluntary, but it's not." Claire listened, silent. "You did what most people wouldn't dare," Brennan added. "You spoke truth to power and walked away standing." Claire sighed. "It still feels strange, like the war ended but I don't know where home is anymore." Brennan's voice softened. "Maybe home isn't a place. Maybe it's that feeling when you can finally breathe again." Weeks passed. The world kept moving. St. Michael's Community Center reopened. roof repaired, walls repainted. The children's laughter echoed through the halls again. Pastor Fleming insisted on naming one of the new classrooms the Daniels Room. Claire protested, but the plaque went up anyway. Her mother cried when she saw it. Coleman started a new training program for veterans struggling to adapt to civilian life. He asked Claire to help. The first day she walked into the classroom, a row of veterans waiting, some missing limbs, some missing confidence. She introduced herself simply. "My name's Clare. I used to think my story ended when I lost everything. Turns out that was just the first chapter." She paused, scanning their faces. "I'm not here to teach you how to shoot. I'm here to teach you how to remember what you were before the world told you to forget." And in that moment, for the first time, she felt whole. One afternoon, while packing up her gear, a delivery arrived. No return address, just a small box. Inside was a single spent casing, polished brass, and a note. 100 shots, 100 truths, see. Coleman's handwriting. She smiled, placed the casing beside her medal. A reminder that not all victories are loud. Some just echo quietly through the people they change. That night, the desert called her one last time. She drove out to the range as the sun sank low. The air was warm, the horizon endless. She stood there for a long moment, the wind brushing her hair, the same rifle in her hands. She didn't need to shoot. She just needed to breathe. The wind carried the faint scent of oil and dust. Somewhere far away, a flag rustled. And as the last light faded, Claire whispered to herself, "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." The quiet swallowed the words, carried them out across the sand, into the dark. And for once, silence didn't mean fear. It meant peace. Some victories don't end with applause. Some end with a deep breath, and the quiet realization that you're still here. 3 months had passed since the inquiry. The desert winds had shifted seasons, and with them, so had Claire's life. No reporters followed her anymore. No articles, no headlines. The world had found its next scandal, its next hero, its next distraction, and Claire was grateful for that. Fame was noise. Silence was peace. But silence didn't mean idleness. She started teaching at Coleman's veteran program, an initiative built from scraps of hope and a rented warehouse on the edge of town. They called it Iron Wind Academy, though most of the veterans jokingly referred to it as the Sandbox. The name fit. It was rough, hot, unforgiving, but honest, like the people who came through its doors. That morning, Claire stood at the firing line as a group of 8 veterans lined up behind the benches. Some had lost jobs, others marriages, a few limbs. But the thing they all had in common was the same hollow look she once worn. The look of someone who'd forgotten how to trust themselves. "All right," she said, voice calm but firm. "We're not here to chase perfection. We're here to chase quiet." They blinked at her, unsure. "Quiet?" one man, Hughes, asked. "We're shooting rifles, ma'am. Ain't a lot of quiet in that." Claire smiled faintly. "Not the kind you hear, the kind you feel, the moment between breath and trigger, the second before everything moves. That's where you find yourself again." Coleman, standing behind the group, nodded approvingly. "You heard her. Less talk, more breathing." The line filled with the rhythmic sound of bolts cycling, the crisp crack of gunfire echoing through the dusty range. Claire walked behind them, watching stances, correcting posture, offering small nods of encouragement. At first they missed, a lot. But little by little she saw it, the change. The hands steadied, the breathing slowed, the doubt began to fade. And she realized something. Teaching wasn't about making them better shooters. It was about giving them back something they'd lost, control. After class, Claire and Coleman sat on the tailgate of his truck, drinking warm water and watching the sunset spill gold across the desert. "Not bad for day 3, he said. "They're rough," she replied, "but they care. That's more than most." He nodded. You're good with them, better than I ever was." She laughed softly. "You're kidding, right?" "No," he said. "I bark, you listen, there's a difference." She looked down at her hands, the same hands that had once shaken behind a counter, that had once trembled holding the truth inside too long. Now they were steady again. "You ever think about how we got here?" she asked. "Every damn day," Coleman said, "but I stopped trying to understand it. Some paths don't make sense until you reach the end." She nodded. "Yeah, I used to think my story ended the day they took my future. Turns out it started there." He smiled faintly. "That's the kind of thing people put on a wall." "Maybe," she said, "but I don't need it on a wall, I just need it to stay true." That night, Claire returned home to find her mother asleep in the living room, the TV still humming quietly. A news anchor was speaking over images of soldiers deploying overseas. She turned the volume down, tucked a blanket over her mother, and stood there for a moment, watching her breathe. She realized how fragile time was, how easily it slipped through your fingers while you were busy surviving. Her mother stirred. "You're home late." "Long day," Claire said softly. "The vets are improving, you'd like them." Her mother smiled sleepily. "They have you, that's improvement enough." Weeks turned into months. The program grew. Veterans came from other towns. Donations started pouring in from people who'd watched the fundraiser video online. The community that once saw Claire as a curiosity now saw her as something else, proof that broken doesn't mean finished. One afternoon, a young woman approached her after class. "Ma'am," she said nervously, "I wanted to thank you. My brother was one of the Marines Captain Sheridan blamed. He left the service because of that report. When your story came out, he said he finally slept again." Claire's throat tightened. "How's he doing now?" "Better," the woman said, smiling. "He started coaching at a high school, said he remembered why he loved shooting again." Claire nodded, unable to find words. Sometimes the impact of truth doesn't shout. It ripples quietly through lives you'll never meet. But peace never lasts forever. Late one evening, Coleman came to her house, his expression serious. He held out his phone. "You need to see this." On the screen was a video, grainy footage of a man leaving a bar, being followed by two others. "That's Sheridan," Coleman said. "He's been drinking himself stupid since the investigation. Word is, he's blaming you for everything. Says you ruined his life." Claire frowned. "He ruined his own." Coleman sighed. "Yeah, but angry men don't think like that. You should be careful." "I'm not afraid of him." "I know," Coleman said. "That's what worries me." A week later it happened. She was locking up the training range after sunset when she heard footsteps behind her. "You just couldn't leave it alone, could you?" Sheridan's voice, slurred, bitter, full of rage and whiskey. Claire turned slowly. He stood there, unsteady, eyes bloodshot. "Captain Sheridan," she said carefully, "you need to leave." He laughed harshly. "Captain, not anymore. You took that from me. You took everything." "I didn't take anything. You did this to yourself." He stepped closer. "You think you're some kind of hero. You're a nobody with a borrowed rifle who got lucky." She didn't flinch. "Luck doesn't shoot 100 clean." His face twisted. "You humiliated me. You humiliated all of us. You think anyone'll trust me again. You think command'll ever forget." He took another step forward. Coleman's truck headlights cut through the darkness suddenly, blinding both of them. The engine roared closer. Sheridan froze as Coleman stepped out, his voice low and cold. "You need to walk away, son." "This isn't your business," Sheridan spat. "It is if you touch her," Coleman said. For a long moment the desert wind filled the silence between them. Then Sheridan backed up slowly, shaking his head. "You'll regret this," he muttered, before stumbling into the darkness. Coleman watched until the sound of his car faded. Then he turned to Claire. "You all right?" She exhaled shakily. "Yeah, I think so." Coleman studied her for a long moment. You didn't even flinch." She looked out toward the dark horizon. "I spent 12 years afraid. I'm done flinching." The next morning, Brennan called. "I heard about Sheridan," she said. "He's been picked up for disorderly conduct near base housing. He won't be a problem anymore." Claire rubbed her temples. "I didn't want him to end like that." "People like him end the way they live," Brennan said. "He made his choices, so did you." Claire stared out the window. The sun was rising, painting the rooftops gold. "Sometimes I wonder if I could have done it differently, without burning so much." Brennan's voice softened. "You didn't burn it, Claire, you cleansed it. There's a difference." Months passed quietly after that. The program continued to grow. Claire became something she'd never imagined, a mentor, a guide, a voice people listened to. Not because she wanted to be heard, but because she'd earned silence and people trusted those who spoke from it. One day, Coleman handed her a small folder. Inside was an official letter, Department of Veterans Affairs Certification of Instruction. "You're official now," he said. "Full instructor status, pay grade and everything." Claire smiled. "I didn't even apply." "I did," he said. "You've been doing the job anyway, might as well get paid." She laughed softly. "You never stop surprising me, Gunny." He shrugged, "Just keeping promises." That evening, as the sun sank over the range, Claire stayed behind after everyone left. She lay prone, one last rifle beside her, a single target at 500 meters. But she didn't fire. She just stared through the scope, breathing slow, the horizon blurring into shades of orange and gold. She thought about everything: the girl she'd been, the silence she'd endured, the people she'd lost, and the truth she'd finally spoken. And in that moment, something inside her eased. She realized she didn't need redemption anymore. She'd already found it. In every breath she'd taught a veteran to control, in every life she'd touched without meaning to. Later that night, she drove to St. Michael's Community Center. The building glowed softly in the dark, full of laughter and music. Inside, the children were playing, the walls lined with hand-painted art. Pastor Fleming spotted her at the door. "Claire," he said, beaming, "come in, you missed the raffle." She laughed. "That's all right, I never win those anyway." He smiled, guiding her to the plaque by the main hall, the DANIELS room in honor of courage and truth. Claire stared at it, heart tightening. "I don't deserve this," she whispered. Fleming smiled gently. "Maybe not, but the people you helped do. That's why your name's on it. To remind them that courage isn't about noise, it's about choosing to stand when silence would be easier." She ran her fingers across the letters. They were cold, firm, permanent. "Thank you," she said quietly. That night as she drove home, the radio played softly, an old country song about forgiveness and time. The wind rolled through the open window. The stars shimmered faintly over the desert road. And Claire finally smiled, not because she'd won, but because she'd survived long enough to understand what winning really meant. Not medals, not recognition, not revenge. Just the quiet peace that comes when you've told the truth, and you're still standing. What happens after the storm ends? When the noise fades, the crowd goes home, and all that's left is yourself, standing in the quiet aftermath of everything you've survived. For Claire Daniels, that question haunted her for months. Not painfully, just persistently, like an echo that wanted to be understood. Life had slowed down since the inquiry. The academy ran smoothly, her mother's health had stabilized, and for the first time in years, the future didn't feel like a closed door. It felt like a road, unpaved, uncertain but open. Yet even peace takes getting used to. One late afternoon, Claire sat at her desk in the academy office, a stack of paperwork beside her, the hum of the ceiling fan blending with distant laughter from the range outside. Through the window, she could see a handful of veterans training, 2 new recruits, both nervous, both still flinching at every shot. She smiled faintly. She knew that look. The fear wasn't about noise or recoil. It was about trust, the hardest target to hit. Coleman walked in holding a clipboard. "Requisitions signed," he said. "Ammo shipments delayed again. Government contracts move slower than church donations." Claire laughed softly. "That's why we keep spare boxes." He glanced at her, then out the window. "They're improving. You ever notice that?" "Every day," she said. He leaned on the doorframe, crossing his arms. "And you look lighter." She smirked. "Lighter?" "Yeah," he said, "like you finally dropped something heavy." Claire paused, considering. "Maybe I did. Maybe I stopped carrying guilt that wasn't mine." Coleman nodded. "About damn time." That evening, as the sun dipped low, she and Coleman walked the length of the range, the sand crunching softly beneath their boots. The air was cool, painted with the gold and rose colors of fading daylight. "You know," he said, "you could do more with this. Expand the program, start new branches in other towns. There's a waiting list already." Claire smiled, shaking her head. "I didn't build this to grow it. I built it to heal something." He raised an eyebrow. "And is it healed?" She looked out at the horizon, wide, endless, the same desert that had once been her proving ground. "Maybe not all of it, but enough to breathe again." He gave a small, satisfied nod. "That's all anyone needs." A few days later, she received a letter in the mail. The envelope bore the Marine Corps seal. She hesitated before opening it, half expecting another bureaucratic aftershock. But it wasn't that. It was an invitation. The United States Marine Corps cordially invites Ms. Clare Daniels to attend the upcoming Marksmanship Symposium as a civilian guest lecturer on integrity and performance ethics. For a long time, she just stared at the words. Then she laughed. It wasn't bitter. It was something softer, the kind of laughter that comes from realizing the world can still surprise you. The symposium was held at Camp Pendleton, in the same base that had once been the backdrop of her worst memories. As she drove through the gates, she could almost feel the weight of those years pressing against her chest. But she wasn't that same girl anymore. She'd been burned, yes, but she'd walked through the fire and come out steel. The auditorium was packed with Marines, instructors, and cadets. She stood backstage, waiting for her name to be called. Brennan was there too, clipboard in hand, her grin impossible to hide. "You nervous?" she asked. Claire exhaled slowly. "No, just remembering." Brennan nodded. "Then make them remember too." When they introduced her, the applause was polite but curious. Many in the audience had heard her story, some admired it, others questioned it, but all were listening. Claire stepped up to the podium, the microphone adjusting with a faint click. For a moment she didn't speak. She just looked at them, a sea of uniforms, young faces full of ambition, older ones full of experience. Then she said simply, "I was never supposed to be here." A murmur ran through the room. 12 years ago," she continued, "I stood where some of you stand, full of belief that the system was perfect, that truth would always be rewarded. Then I learned that sometimes the truth gets buried to protect comfort, and sometimes doing the right thing costs everything." She paused. "But here's what no one told me. Losing everything isn't the end. It's the clearing. It's where you find who you really are." The room had gone completely silent. "I'm not here to talk about marksmanship," she said. "You already know how to shoot. I'm here to talk about the one thing that matters more than skill, conscience. The voice that whispers when orders shout. The moment between action and obedience where you decide what kind of soldier, what kind of human you'll be." Her tone softened. "When I pulled the trigger on that range, I wasn't aiming at targets. I was aiming at doubt, at silence, at the part of me that had stopped believing I mattered. And I hit it, not because I was strong, but because I was tired of being small." A long, reverent pause followed. Then she ended with, "Integrity doesn't make you popular, It makes you lonely, but it also makes you free. When she stepped away from the podium, the applause started slow, then swelled, echoing off the walls like rolling thunder. Brennan caught her eye from the side of the stage, mouthing, "You did it." But Claire just smiled faintly. "No," she whispered, "we did." Afterward, a young Marine approached her outside the hall. He couldn't have been more than 22. His uniform was new, his eyes nervous. "Ma'am," he said, "I just wanted to say thank you. I read about what happened. My dad served under Colonel Garrison. He always said things weren't right back then, but nobody spoke up. You did." Claire nodded gently. Sometimes, all it takes is one voice to remind others they're not crazy. The Marine smiled shyly. "Can I ask you something? When you hit those 100 targets, what were you thinking?" She looked at him for a long moment before answering. "Honestly, nothing. I wasn't thinking at all. I was just listening to the quiet between heartbeats." He frowned, puzzled. "The quiet." She smiled softly. "That's where truth lives. You'll find it one day." The following weeks were peaceful. The academy expanded modestly, and Claire found herself traveling occasionally, guest lectures, training sessions, interviews. But she never let any of it turn into fame. She didn't want to be a symbol. She just wanted to be useful. Back home, life was simple. Her mother's garden finally bloomed after years of neglect. The smell of jasmine filled the porch again. Linda often teased, "The flowers are following your lead, sweetheart. They've decided to grow again." And Claire would just smile. Maybe they got tired of hiding too. Then one morning a package arrived. No return address, just her name. Inside was a small wooden box. When she opened it, she found an engraved brass plaque. It read, "For showing the Corps that integrity is not weakness. Signed, Marine Corps Marksmanship Division." She stared at it for a long time, fingers tracing the etching. It wasn't a medal, it wasn't official, but it meant more than any decoration ever could. She placed it beside her spent casing, Coleman's gift, and her old medal from her youth. 3 symbols of who she'd been, who she'd become, and who she'd chosen to be. Months later, on a quiet Sunday, Claire stood once again at the desert wind range, the same place where her story had both broken and begun again. The sand shimmered in the heat, the air was still. Beside her, a teenage girl adjusted her rifle nervously. She was part of a new youth mentorship group, kids from town, learning discipline and patience through marksmanship. Claire crouched beside her. "Remember," she said softly, "don't rush. Let the world go quiet first." The girl took a breath. The shot cracked, the target pinged. A smile spread across her face. "I hit it." Claire grinned. "Told you, it's not about aim, it's about trust." The girl looked up. "Trust in what?" Claire gazed toward the endless horizon. "Yourself." That night, Claire sat on her porch, a cup of coffee in hand, watching the desert stars blink to life one by one. Her mother dozed beside her, the radio humming a slow tune. The night was warm, still, infinite. And Claire thought about all the versions of herself that had lived before this one: the dreamer, the soldier, the exile, the survivor. Each had fought her battles, each had paid a price. And now finally each could rest. Her voice, soft but clear, could almost have been a narrator's, if anyone had been there to hear it. There's a kind of strength the world doesn't see, the kind that doesn't march or shout or break. It just endures, it listens, it waits. Sometimes strength looks like defiance, sometimes it looks like forgiveness, and sometimes it just looks like peace. She looked down at her hands, steady, scarred, unshaken. The same hands that once begged to be invisible were now the hands that taught others how to aim for something better. The wind picked up gently, rustling the leaves. A faint smile touched her lips. "Sometimes," she whispered, "dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts." The stars shimmered brighter, the desert quiet around her. And for the first time in her life, Silence didn't remind her of loss. It reminded her of freedom.